Hello, friends. Welcome, everyone. My name's Tami Simon. I'm the founder of Sounds True, and I'm so happy to see so many people interested in our essential need for darkness. Here, as we get started, if you want, you can just write into the chat. What is it about darkness that brought you here, that has you so intrigued? If you will, what's your aspiration, or what are you hoping that darkness will bring you in your life? You can just type a word in the chat. Maybe it's rest, healing, whatever it might be. Okay, our essential need for darkness. I'm here with Andrew Holecek, who not only is a friend, but has a gift that I really admire in people. It's rare, which is the ability to be both operating at a depth of understanding and bringing people to great depths, but doing so in a way that's accessible, friendly, broad, inviting. Often people are one or the other. Andrew is both. I also want to welcome all of you who have already enrolled in our upcoming course with Andrew. It's called Into the Luminous Dark. Into the Luminous Dark. And I also want to extend an invitation for those of you who are with us for this webinar and are interested in the course. During this webinar, one of our goals is to give you a sense of the types of benefits the course will deliver and the power of the luminous dark. It's a 6-week course. It begins on September 8th. It features 6 live weekly sessions plus 2 Q&A sessions with Andrew. It's a progressive journey, so we deepen our practice, our darkness practice, over 6 weeks. You'll hear more about it as we get to the end of the webinar. And also, if you're on the player page now, you can hit the Learn More button, or we'll put a link in the chat in order for you to learn more. Now, I imagine many of you know Andrew or know something about him. I'm just going to be very brief here and say a couple of words. He's a scholar practitioner, both. This is a both and kind of person. He's also completed the Tibetan Buddhist 3-year retreat, no easy feat. He's one of the West's foremost teachers of dream yoga and dark retreat, and he's helping to bring these practices into conversation with modern science, and that's something we're going to learn more about. All right, all that said, Andrew, come on, let's get started.
Hey, Tami, so great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, looking forward to this chat.
Okay, let's start really, I think, with an overview of why is this practice so transformative at so many different levels. And I am just going to say one more thing, because I've heard you say this, that in all of your years of meditation, exploration of psychedelics, practice of lucid dreaming and dream yoga, nothing compares. Nothing compares to your experience of dark immersion. That's just so powerful for someone in your experience, you know, your age, your experience, etc. So, okay, tell us, why is it so transformative?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, it's one reason I'm so excited. You know, I've been kind of sitting on this for 30 years, and I finally get to share. I learned this from my Gen Z people, this new word, right? Ridic. You know, it's ridiculous. The ROI, the return on investment with this practice is ridic. And in my own experience, just kept thinking, well, is it just me? You know, why? So I started listening. That's when I started working with my researchers. I've listened to hundreds and hundreds, probably close to 1,000 post-exit retreat interviews with people. And I realized it's not just me. People from all walks of life talking about just extraordinary array of transformations, healing, restorations, trauma, I mean, creativity, it's really quite extraordinary. And so this is when I started looking more precisely about models in my own experience, looking historically for some models. And let me just share one thing that we picked up recently. We're completing a first study through the Institute of Advanced Consciousness Studies, first study of a dark retreat and spending 4 nights, 3 days in the dark. And when the retreatants came out, the researchers were starting to do coding, collecting the data. And one of the things they discovered that's really, really compelling is people were talking about, without any prompting, this is just what came up in the data, it's called phenomenological coding, 6 degrees of opening, expansion, dilation. And this is actually interesting. You go into the dark and it's not just your eyes that dilate. Your body dilates, your mind dilates, your heart dilates. As Rumi put it so beautifully, you open into wider, wider rings of being. And so we discovered through the data that cognitive opening, perceptual opening, identity expansion, what's called cognitive opening, which is motivational opening, somatic opening, basically just greater and greater degrees of expansion. And so this in itself was profoundly compelling. And then I started to look for more like intuitive models. And this one really struck me. I was quite delighted to see this. You can look at darkness as both the absence of color, right? There's no color in there. But you can just as equally, in color theory, you can just as equally think of it as the presence of every color. I mean, this is no kidding. If I was to give you a piece of blank paper, white paper, and like 50 different color markers and say, okay, draw on this for a couple hours and come back, what color do you think I would see? I'd see black. And so to me, color represents, can be depicted in frequencies. And so what it suggests that's so compelling is that everything is in darkness, literally everything. And so this is, I think, a wonderful intuitive model that it's so pregnant with potentiality. It's so ripe. And so we're studying this very concertedly now with a number of institutions actually around the world. They're trying to substantiate some of these intuitive models on all these different vectors, like what exactly is going on. But this is, I think, one of the more central aspects of it, this idea of expansion, by the way, meditation, habituation to openness. When you go into the dark, Rudy Gobert, the NBA superstar, he went in, he came out, said something almost iconic at this point. He said, dark retreat is meditation times 1,000. So it's an amazing kind of catalytic converter. It's just an amazing accelerator for a whole range of psychospiritual processes. So in a nutshell.
One of the things I'm curious about, Andrew, because I see from some of the things that people wrote, this desire for deep inner peace and calm. At the same time, you go into darkness, and a lot of material, from my understanding and experience, will come up for you to work through. What do you see as the relationship between the inner calm we seek and the processing of material, and how those both happen in the dark?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yeah, William Blake talks about this quite beautifully, not specifically about darkness, but he has this wonderful rendering of double vision, which is the capacity and the ability to see, several different vectors simultaneously. In this case, you're talking about both of these, right? That in this case, there is absolutely positively, once you open and surrender to the darkness, I mean, if you go in there, and that's really what we're doing with this course, is creating instructions, practices, and whatnot that allow one to open in an environment that without some preparation can otherwise elicit defensive contraction. But with that aside, then you could absolutely positively return to this kind of primordial matrix of deep rest and restoration and inner peace. But you nailed the first part, and this is actually super important, that meditation habituation to openness, as we open in all these rings of being that I talked about, it's exactly like you said. When you open up, things are going to come up. And honestly, this is what you're paying for, right? And it has to. Psychological levels, spiritual levels, if it doesn't, these unconscious processes that remain tucked away in the darkness of the unconscious mind, these are our makers, these are our drivers. This is basically what constitutes the vast majority of our lives. I mean, researchers estimate that, check the facts out here, about 95% of what we do is driven by unconscious processes. And so what happens in the dark, Carl Jung was onto this in a big way, the depth psychologist, we're bringing unconscious processes into the light of consciousness so that we can relate to them instead of from them, because relating from them is no relationship. So this is super important. You're in there, all the stuff is going to come up. I mean, what did Rinpoche say? Like the master of the one-liner here? Meditation isn't a sedative, it's a laxative. And so when you're in the dark, you're laxating, right? And so do a little math. I like playing with this. Do a little math. So if dark retreat is meditation times 1,000, and dark retreat isn't a sedative, it's a laxative, we'll do a little math. I'm not sure if this is even a word, you're laxating. All this stuff, like I mentioned, is going to come up. And this is where a great deal of the transformation comes from psychologically. Because if the stuff isn't brought into the light of awareness, it festers. Undigested, unmetabolized experience is just lodged in your body-mind matrix, your unconscious mind. And there it lurks, and your life just becomes an unconscious symptomatic readout of the undigested material. So you're in the dark, you open, this stuff comes up. And you have the capacity through the training that we'll be bringing about, relating to it, transforming it, purifying it. For those who like Eastern language, this is actually how you purify karma. This is a rapid karmic purification chamber as well. So yeah, lots to say on that front. But
In the Into the Luminous Dark
yeah.
6-week program, here we are, we're working with an eye mask. We're doing this for a certain amount of time each day. How do you think that really approximates in terms of transformational value? Even you don't need to give me a mathematical number, Andrew, but it's not the same as going into a dark retreat cave for a period of days. At the same time, not that easy to find an available cave for most of us.
Yeah, well, we're going to be working. That's just another really spot-on question. We're going to be working not only with, kind of introduction to classic dark retreat, but a more kind of titrated, dripped, gray approach, which is weaving in and out, microdosing, if you like working with that analogy. And so it's amazing. I mean, Richie Davidson has done some studies, not specifically on dark retreat, but many of your listeners may know him as one of the world's leading neuroscientists exploring the interface between meditation and neuroscience. His data has shown that sessions as little as 5 minutes have neurological consequences, that you can start to transform with that level of titration. And so what we'll be doing each week is adding a little bit more. And this is actually quite important, because when most people go in, even to if there's a standard right there, right now, it's kind of 4 nights, 3 days. A lot of people without preparation will enter a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. Again, they defensively contract. And so by dripping it, by titrating it, then you can set the bar, you can set the dosage. And so um, it's important, because using the parallel of psychedelics, you can absolutely positively, I'm working with a number of scientists who also do parallel studies in the world of psychedelics. They relate to dark retreat, as do I, as a type of sober psychedelic, which we can talk about. But playfully and realistically, one of the issues in the dark is dosage, getting the dosage right. And by this, what I mean is, how big a dose of you can you handle? Because if you go in too ambitiously, I wouldn't even say aggressively, you can overdose on yourself. And so this way, by working with this titrated gray approach that we've been refining for about 1.5 years now, you can get the dosage right. You can see what works for you. You can come up against your challenge zone. And I'll be talking about that and what that means, how to relate to these opportunities, how to relate to some of the challenges. And therefore, you become your own meditation instructor rather quickly in the dark, because nobody can follow you in there. Nobody knows your idiosyncrasies and quirks better than you do. And so by dripping it, titrating it in this increased way, you can get the dosage spot on. And eventually, when we start collecting even more and more data, right? This is amazing, Tami. There's a ton of data on flotation tank studies, the work of Peter Sedfield and the environmental restricted stimulation technique. There's like zero. There's one study of one participant. In other words, one neuroscientist went in and did some data. That's not a big data pool. So there are zero studies on this, but we have so many studies in the works. And one of them is, in fact, going to be creating really healthy intake forms. So we know, based on certain, profiling is such a dangerous word these days, but basically on intake histories and information, we can be very specific and targeted towards how this dark medicine can be handed out.
Andrew, I wonder right here at the beginning, before we even go more into the transformational impacts and the operational forms, what allows this to happen inside of us. Give us a taste right now. Give us a micro dose, if you
I love
will.
it. I love it. Let's get a feel for it. Well, this is actually interesting. Yeah, I'll do that in literally 30 seconds or so, but getting a feel for it is actually quite revelatory, even in terms of the kind of the languaging, because a large part of what this practice is an incredible introduction into the most intimate, non-dualistic of all sense faculties, which is touch. It's the only sense faculty that is fully operational and online in the dark. Dualistic senses of sight and sound are pretty much gone. Yes, you can smell food when it comes in. Yes, you can taste it. But it's a really wonderful introduction to taction, feeling, making contact. And I will argue quite extensively in this course, and this is important because yes, this practice is super helpful for us, but it's just as helpful, in fact, I think even more so in this age of the meta crisis. And what I'll be riffing about quite a bit in the course, because this kind of contextualizes it, the meta crisis, I think you can make a strong case as a crisis of touch. We've lost contact with ourselves. We've lost contact with others, with the earth. That's why we can do, how else can we explain what we do to each other and to the earth? With reality itself. And so with that said, here's a taste for it. So go ahead and just close your eyes. You can place one hand over your heart. Right here, there's an invitation for touch, for contact, and also an invitation for being held, holding yourself. In what we'll see in the course, in the cradle of loving kindness. And then take a nice big inhalation, and then when you exhale, just sigh and rest at the very end of the out breath. So here we go. That's it. Right there is a glimpse of how the darkness allows you to catch your breath, to finally take a deep, fundamental into the bones in breath, and then a final exhalation and rest, relax. If there's a fundamental narrative to this practice, it really is open and relax. And what I'll share in the course extensively, and this is really, I think, the genius of this medicine, we can open our eyes and put our hand down. It is that this tool is of dark medicine, dark retreat, is like the addition of a tool designed for subtraction. I mean, Meister Eckhart, the great Christian mystic, said it beautifully when he said the soul does not grow by addition, but by subtraction. And so just like when we fall into deep, dreamless, non-REM restorative sleep, that's where human growth hormone is released, all these amazing restorative capacities take place. This is what we're forced into when we get sick. Our body just demands that we go into the dark and rest at this level. Well, in a very real way, dark retreat extends the night. And you have this extraordinary capacity to restore, to reintegrate through simply the cessation, the negation of all the distractions, the fracturing. You know, the word distract, this is a really big deal in the meditation business, and especially in the dark, where all distractions are taken away. The word literally means to draw or pull apart. And basically what happens is when we pull apart again and again, one distraction upon the next, one dismemberment, one forgetting, one mindlessness, right? This is then what accumulates to create individual and then collective metacrisis. And so when you're in the dark, to distract is replaced with retract, retreat. And this is really quite amazing. If we just stop all the wreckage, if we stop all the breaking, the dismembering, the body knows what to do. And this is a highly embodied somatic practice. That's where the transformation comes from. By allowing the wisdom of your body. Saraha said this, right? Wisdom abides in the body. If we retreat into the wisdom of the body, waking down, journey of the soul in the dark, waking down into the wisdom of the body, this is where the body knows what to do. I mean, this is exactly what happens, like I mentioned earlier, when we get super stressed out, where eventually we get sick. We're forced to rest and reset. And darkness basically allows us to do this in a more preventive way, you could say prophylactic way, is a way to prevent these levels of dis-ease by retreating into the ease that's naturally present in the body. So this is the fun, there's several core narratives. When we open into wider rings of being, we're actually opening into wider dimensions of our own being, getting more in touch with outer body, then subtle inner body processes, and then even further and super subtle innermost. And so this kind of somatic journey is absolutely critical to what darkness is all about.
Let me ask you, Andrew, what is it about being in the dark that is particularly embodied? Because, I could imagine, I'm in the dark and I'm spaced out. I'm spaced out in the night sky. Where am I? Like, why emphasize the embodied component? Do I need to be doing something in particular for it to be embodied?
Well, not necessarily. If we simply allow ourselves, to open and drop in, we will actually find ourselves taking increased refuge in our soma. Again, this kind of return to the reduction base of touch, proprioception. The scientists that we're working with speak a lot. It's a geek speak, but it's intuitive about what's called enteroception. This is basically in contradistinction to exteroception. In other words, usually when we see things from the outside, exterior input. Dark retreat, and it's not the only practice that does this, of course. Many inner yogas and body work practices do this. But dark retreat, and we're studying this, cultivates an exquisitely heightened interoceptive capacity, interoceptive sensitivity that leads to interoceptive sensibility. And so I love playing with language, I mean, this practice brings you to your senses by cutting away the most dualistic senses. It returns you to this reduction base. And so you mentioned something quite important. The only time, and this is not going to happen at all in the course that we're doing, because we're going to be dripping and titrating and working our way in. So the following is not something that we really need to be concerned with. But in the more extended periods of like 1, 2, 3 days or longer, the only time people get in trouble is just like you're suggesting. Instead of healthy differentiation, they start to dissociate. And they lose contact with their bodies. And that's where things can become problematic. But here, this is the following, Tami, this is a hugely important statement that I'm going to say right now, is that with the right attitude, and this is what this course will be largely designed to provide, there are no failures in this practice. There's only revelations. Darkness provides, there's so many ironies here too, by the way. Irony and paradox are the way non-duality is perceived through a dualistic lens. And darkness, in my languaging, is the color of non-duality. But basically, it takes you down to these fundamental degrees of openness and contact. And darkness represents a metaphysical mirror. This is an amazing thing. It's so many ironies. You go into the dark, it's the most illuminating thing I've ever done, right? Going into the dark is the most illuminating thing I've ever done. Because for one, I can't get away from myself. You learn so much about yourself. And this metaphysical mirror is an extraordinary capacity to answer arguably the single most important question, certainly in philosophy, but in even the human condition. It's like, who am I? And so when you work your way in this metaphysical mirror, you can start to see, all these magnificent dimensions of your being. And so in this regard, there's no failures. There's only revelations. And so if you're having some issues, and so a large part of what we'll talk about is, challenges and whatnot, because on one level, that's what you're paying for. You're paying for this stuff to come up. And so with the right attitude, there are no failures. projections turn into reflections. Failure, so to speak, turn into revelations. And so this is another reason why the practice is so impactful, because with the right lens, there's just so much that's revealed when we finally stop running away from ourselves. And just to show you how central this is, Tami, look how many terms for awakening in the wisdom traditions are in fact terms of cessation or negation, right? You have nirvana, extinction, nirodha, cessation, nirguna, nirvikalpa, nisprapancha, and then of course the granddaddy of them all, non-duality. And so I'm circumambulating your question. Hopefully I'm throwing enough data on it that eventually, you can return to this foundational ground of your body, of your being, because in a real way, you're almost forced into it. You're almost forced to make contact with your body. So I'll pause there and see if that's exactly targeting what you're asking, but that's what came to mind.
It is. I do have a follow-up question from what you've said so far, which is a couple of different times
Sure.
you've emphasized the notion of openness.
Yeah.
If you were just to describe the whole practice, open and relax, and that these different kinds of openness can be measured through darkness practice, they increase our openness. What do you mean, Andrew? I think I have a sense of what you mean, but I'm not sure. What do you mean by quote unquote openness?
Yeah, okay. Well, let's get a sense for it right now. All right. All right.
Yes.
Close your eyes for just a second and bring to mind three experiences. This is pretty easy for this audience. Just bring to mind three memories, three experiences to which you might append the label mystical or spiritual. Could be a walk in nature, the birth of your child, deep meditative experience, profound psychedelic experience. It doesn't matter. Just bring to mind three spiritual mystical experiences. That's pretty easy. Now, look a little bit below, and this is what darkness invites, looking a little bit below surface appearance, and see if you can find an underlying common denominator behind each of these three experiences. And I can almost promise you, you might language it using some synonyms for openness, but in my experience, behind each one of these experiences, spiritual experience, is a quality of openness. And in fact, I invite you to take a closer look yet, that when you have a grand opening, right? A huge mystical experience, I can almost guarantee that the ecstasy, the degree of the ecstasy that you feel is directly proportional to the preceding level of agony. In other words, if you're really contracted, and most of us are, when you have an experience of openness, it can be breathtakingly ecstatic, but it's only that way because you're so contracted. And so if you want to get a sense, in one way to get a feel for what openness is like is to look at its contradistinction, which are moments of contraction. And here you can look at moments of intense anger, intense fear, intense panic, startle, surprise. That's pretty easy. I mean, sometimes when I do this in an audience, I'll do a little warning and then I'll just bark out. I'll just shout out. And I can see half the group just jump. It's because the contraction is there. And so the openness you can measure in contradistinction to that. You can do exactly the same experiment, Tami, and I recommend people do it for moments, 3 moments of unconditional happiness. What are you going to find underneath there? Probably some quality of openness. And then even deeper, perhaps, and this is really, I think, super important, the following, because in many ways, this has been the fruitional discovery for me in the dark. Look below 3 experiences of unconditional love. And what do you feel in your heart? What do you feel in your body? What do you feel in your entire being? When I look, I feel qualities of openness. And again, this is what was so stunning to me when the researchers came back and said, oh my God, these dark retreatants were coming up with 6 degrees of this quality of openness. And so this is also super interesting when you're coming out. So let me just share this story. And I hope this is being targeted enough, but this is a big deal. One of the most interesting aspects of exploring darkness are the transitions coming in and the transitions coming out. And so in terms of coming out, what I've noticed every single time is I'm in the dark, I surrender, I open, relax. I'm expanding, expanding, expanding. I have no doubt, I would never do it, but I have no doubt if I'm in there for, I don't know, 5 days, 6 days or longer, and the walls were to blow off and the ceiling was to blow off, I have no doubt I would probably go into shock because I'm so open, I'm so expanded, so dilated in the dark. And so the reason I mention this is that one of the most revelatory aspects is when you come out. When you do it very, very slowly, you start to see the contractions come on. You start to see the armoring come back on. You start to see the calluses come back on. And this then is profoundly revelatory because it shows to you, oh my goodness, this is why I lead such a calloused, cold-hearted, insensitive life. This is, the more contracted you are, the more insensitive you are. So does that throw a dart at what you're asking?
You are throwing darts and they are hitting the target, Andrew. I want to ask you a couple of the questions that we
Yeah, yeah, far away.
received from participants.
Oh, cool.
Someone wrote in, as a visual artist,
Oh,
I'm curious what Andrew means by darkness helping with creative
oh,
plateaus. Is
geez.
there something specific
Yeah,
happening perceptually or neurologically
yeah.
that opens up new work and new creativity?
Yeah, this is such a great question. This is huge. Thank you, whoever asked this. And this was not in the traditional text when I was trained. This is something I discovered in 3 decades. And like the book that you so graciously published, my last one, I didn't write this book, right? It was channeled. I've never said this before. The best book I ever wrote
This is
because
a safe place for you to say
right.
it. Go ahead, Andrew.
My best book out of 10 that I ever wrote because I didn't write it, right? And so this book just burst into my mind in the dark. And we're seeing more and more artists, musicians, poets. I mean, all kinds of creative people. The word is getting out. And we've got some models for this. Two things fundamentally. One is when you open in the dark, darkness is like a duality decimator. One contraction is actually what creates duality, by the way. So it's, what creates all, inside and outside, day and night, self and other, all these different dualities. These are all constructs. These are all made up. And when you go into the dark, all these constructs are deconstructed. So I like to playfully talk about as darkness as this psycho-spiritual demolition derby, where you're basically opening, opening, and dissolving. And one of the most compelling dissolutions that takes place, and this is huge, is the boundary between the conscious and the unconscious mind. You start to realize this following statement might take a little reflection, but it's really quite compelling. The unconscious mind is only unconscious from the perspective of consciousness. And so when consciousness settles, starts to drop into itself, the boundary between the conscious and the unconscious mind starts to dissolve and eventually break down. So then this 95% that I was talking about of the unconscious mind that dictates our conscious lives becomes more and more available to you, more and more open to you. And this is something that Frederick Myers, who predated Freud by 15 years, everybody thinks, well, the unconscious mind came from Freud. Well, no, not quite. Frederick Myers, the British psychologist, talked about what he called the subliminal, which when I first read it, the mistake here was interesting. I read it as subluminal. So he talks about the unconscious mind as the subliminal mind below the threshold, and then the conscious mind is the superliminal or superluminal. And so what happens is when the mind opens, right? This happens naturally, but upsurges of creativity just spontaneously arise. And Frederick Myers wrote about this. He actually hypothesized about the possibility of a kind of a creativity chamber. He didn't know anything about dark retreat, but when I first read this literature, I said, oh my God, this guy was on it, in 1885. So this is one reason, and this is huge. When the conscious mind relaxes its grip, and allows the contents of the unconscious mind to come up, well, it's not all just junk that's going to come up. Yes, you want to come up with some of the more challenging aspects, but you know, there's tremendous treasures and resources. I mean, at the deepest levels, and I'll talk about this in the later stages of the course, you will meet the gods, the deities, and the archetypes. You will drop so far down into the matrix of your being, you're going to drop into these germinative creative dimensions. And this is also really interesting. You can make light. You cannot make darkness. Darkness is the unmade. It's the creation matrix. It's the womb of all manifest reality. And so this is why it represents so much originality. So many worlds creation myths, even the Big Bang. Well, if it's a Big Bang, it had to come out of some primordial contrast medium, and that's darkness. So many mythological creation myths, Book of Genesis, arose out of darkness. So darkness is the essence of creativity. It's the essence of originality. It's the essence of the primordial, the unmade. And so that's another thing. You're actually going down to the reduction base where creativity germinates, where every thought arises, every life arises, every cosmos arises. And then the other one, and then I'll pause because otherwise I'll talk about this the rest of the day, is when you think about what actually brings about creativity, it's a quality of space. It's a quality of accommodation. When we say things, you're working on a problem, and we don't say things like, well, I'm going to eat on it. I'm going to exercise on it. We say things like, oh, I'm going to sleep on it. Well, what that means is you're going to hand it over to the unconscious mind. So even our colloquialisms are revelatory. And so I discovered this because I was really starting to get super interesting because the creative surges, these kind of Promethean gifts, fire and light that occur in the dark, I really got super interested in it. And then I started to realize that in a very real way, before the onset of creativity, and again, look at your own experience, there always has to be a making room. There has to be an allowing and a space. And so what I think you can make a very powerful case for, and I bet we can study this, is the dark retreat is the practice of deliberate absence. Before any presencing, there has to be some absencing, if that's a word. There has to be some clearing that takes place. And so I have no doubt that these and several other players are at work. The last one I'll say here, because there was a question about the kind of the neuropsychological or neuroscientific aspects to this. We've had conversations with researchers out of UC Berkeley that study, so hang with me for just a second, not merely neuroplasticity, which I think most people know what that is, right? The brain itself is highly plastic, it's malleable. What you do with your mind changes your brain. This has been around for 40 years. Well, the work of Goldolan, MD, PhD out of UC Berkeley, I've talked to her. She studies sensory deprivation in animals. And what she's discovered that is so crazy cool that it's actually the study of what's called metaplasticity, right? I have to say, anything you can do today, Tami, I can do meta, right? Meta is like everything. So metaplasticity is the plasticity of neuroplasticity. So I love geeking out. But here's what she discovered. These animals that were put in sensory deprivation, they came out and entered what's called a critical learning period, which is a learning period where the brain is highly neuroplastic. So this is exactly what happens in psychedelic experiences. This is exactly what happens in deep meditation. And I can tell you, this is what happens in the dark. We don't have the data on it yet, but there's no doubt when we start imaging this with fMRIs and PET scans and whatnot, we are totally going to find highly neuro and metaplastic spaces. And so what this means is you come out, you're in this incredible, fertile, critical learning period where it really can translate into a type of hyper-educational, hyper-pedagogical approach. The incredible capacities to accelerate healing and learning when you're so open. Look at kids. Why do kids learn so fast? They're like sponges because they're so much more open than we are. And so by studying these metrics, these mechanics, neuroscientifically, this is going to be a potential game changer. But these to me are like, I mentioned earlier, I come out of the dark, I'm so open, I'm so neuroplastic, I'm so metaplastic, no doubt, that during that critical learning period, when I come out of the dark, and this is where integration is so critical, we're going to talk a lot about that. This is the gold mine. this is where you can really accelerate learning and transformation at all these different levels because you're so, in Buddhist languaging, for those who are here associated with, you're in a highly empty state. You're in a state of emptiness where everything is possible. So I get excited about this because this notion of creativity is really a big deal.
I want to ask you one clarifying question
Okay,
because
fire away.
you said your last book was written through you.
Yeah,
Your other books, I presume you had more of a active role in the writing and researching of the books. You attribute that evolution and that difference to the darkness
I do.
practice you've done.
Yeah, I really do. Yeah, again, I want to say this at the outset. This is not a panacea. This practice is not for everybody. In fact, I started coming out 3 years ago just as much to keep people out as to get people in. Because if you go in with the wrong attitude, whatnot, the darkness will have a talk with you. It's such big medicine. But yes, with that said, my 9 previous books were all, I crafted them and I felt like I was working at them. And then what I noticed in this particularly majorly transformative retreat almost 3 years ago, I had opened to such a degree that I really felt that what came to me, this book at the end of, I think it was in there like just 10 days. This book that you so graciously published, it came to me, I read about Mozart like a symphony. It was just boom, it was there. And I felt, and any creative person who's honest, this is not just me, this is anybody who opens. And the literature here, by the way, is replete. There's tons of data on this, even predating Frederick Myers and his work. He had incredibly interesting theories of genius and creativity. These are all kind of consequences of degrees of openness. And you open and then, dare we say you start to channel, right? Dare we say these whether they're coming from the archetypes within you, which is the creative matrix of from a psychological perspective, or whether they're exogenous, whether you can think of them as deities and angels. My friend David Pramal has this great line. I talked to her about this. She said, there's all these unemployed angels, right? So when you go into the dark, you get them off the unemployment list. And so when you open, whether it's coming top down from outside exogenous deities, gods, and non-human intelligences, shamanistic things take place in this dimension, the capacity to communicate, in absolutely positively psychic ways. So this is another thing you can do in the dark is work with kind of shamanistic and divination sort of properties, or whether it's coming endogenously from the archetypes within you. Fundamentally, this is a large part of what I believe is going on here. Does that clarify? Does that make sense?
Yes, and you said don't go in with the wrong attitude or the wrong mindset, or darkness will, have its way with you, something
Have a
like
talk with
that.
you.
Yeah, what is, I guess I'm not sure if I want to know what is a good aligned mindset, or what would be a mindset that would need correction, but maybe
Yeah,
you could say
yeah,
both relatively quickly here.
I can do it very quickly. So one way not to do this, and I won't name names, but I'm not kidding. I read an article on Outside Magazine about 3 years ago. I'll paraphrase it, but this amazing hyper overachiever type, manosphere dude, it just conquered K2. I've been there in Pakistan. It's the world's second tallest peak. It's killer difficult. And in this article, it talked about, oh my gosh, he conquered, K2. It paled in comparison to his conquest of 7 days in the dark. I read that and I said, you got to be kidding. So that is in my opinion, the wrong attitude. If you go in with this, like, I've got this down, I'm going to conquer it, I've got this thing. Let me share this. This is super cool. We have discovered, and we have the data on this, that some of the people that have the hardest time in the dark, you'd be surprised, are the meditators, the tantrikas, the sadhakas, the people that have been doing all these highfalutin tantric meditations. Why? Because they feel they can out-meditate and out-contextualize the darkness. I've seen this over and over again. And it's like the darkness will have none of that. It will have a little talk with you. Conversely, and this is what we emphasize in the program a lot, beginner's mind. People come in that are just curious. That's such a central ingredient for success. I'm just curious. What's it going to be like in the dark? What is the darkness going to show me? You go in with that more feminine, open, receptive, beginner's mind, curious mind. Oh my gosh, that's the ingredient. That's the secret sauce. You go in with this white knuckling machismo thing. Yes, you'll get through it. You can put it on your CV. You can post it on social media. But, you know, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to strengthen your ego. And so people that go in with this kind of conquering machismo thing, I wouldn't recommend it. People who go in, surrender, open, relax. There's a quality of openness. You can win waving a white flag. Whoa. Because then what happens then, you know, the darkness. This is amazing. The darkness will show you what to do. The darkness will teach you. And of course, it's not really the darkness. The darkness is just a mirror. Your unconscious mind will show you the deities and the, you know, whatever's coming in from the outside. You know, when you open, you start to feel these non-human intelligences and all these external agencies. Like the book I wrote, I mentioned, it's like I didn't write this. I could feel the work of Hermes, Mercurius, you know, the Greek gods. I really felt their scent and so to speak, their signature in the dark. So anyway, that's as quick as I can.
It's good. Now,
nail
Andrew, one of
it.
the things I want to make sure we talk about,
Yeah,
because
totally.
in the headline for the webinar, getting deep rest and
Mm,
restoration in our overstimulated lives.
huge.
So you've made this very compelling case about the creativity component and the processing of unconscious material.
Yep.
What about the
Yep.
rest component?
Huge. Yeah, we could, yeah, sorry, we could have looped this all the way back to the very beginning. I'm still a member of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. So I work a lot with sleep doctors, sleep scientists, sleep laboratories, especially the team at Northwestern University. I'm a counselor and advisor for that team. And so we just launched, or we're about to launch a study exploring sleep specifically and deep restoration in this regard, you know, the release of human growth hormone and all that sort of thing. But I can tell you from my own experience and listening to hundreds of others that have gone through, um, most of the time for a lot of people, for the first couple of days, you are sleeping a lot. And I mean a lot, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. Um, and it's actually kind of humorous. Well, it's not like you got to get up and do something, right? This is what your body needs. And I know people that, yeah, I know on Dark Retreat Guide, he spends about 12, 14 hours a day in bed. Now, that doesn't mean he's sleeping all the time. But for the first couple of days, there is a massive restorative, purely physiological realignment taking place. And you know, the dreams, everything gets realigned in the dream department. You're definitely positively sleeping more. You can collect some pretty interesting data with Whoop and Aura rings when they're masked pretty good with Muse. I mean, we got some really interesting, compelling data on that. Um, so there's no question about it. And we're going to be, again, with all the studies coming up, this is going to be one of the main vectors because in this day when we're so stressed out and just so neurologically out of alignment, getting like, you know, reduction in inflammatory markers, reduction in cortisol, increase in melatonin. I mean, these are things that I have like no brainer. We're going to start to collect a ton of this kind of data. So this purely physiological restorative part is huge. And then parenthetically, one last thing along these lines, Tammy, just to show you how much is available. When you get this quiet in the dark and you get this open in the dark, you have again this interoceptive capacity to really feel into your body, to really tune into things that are normally just lost in the busyness of your life. And you start to feel little things in your body they're highly suggestive. Wow, I'm really feeling a contraction here. And so you can work with that. I'm feeling some tension here. You start to feel that. You start to realize that your body is just riddled with tension. And so you can start to identify these things. You can't solve a problem you don't know you have. So you recognize, you feel, that's the taction thing, the felt thing, you feel them, you open to them, and then using subtle body inner yogic stuff, so switching from science to inner yogic theory, you're opening the chakra systems. You're opening your subtle body. So when it's opening, opening, open, it's not just the mind. Your subtle body is opening. The channels are opening. Energy is flowing through the body. And you come out literally feeling lighter, freer because that subtle body process is itself taking place. So yeah, you see the scope and the spectrum of what's taking place.
You know, when you and I several years ago first started talking about the tremendous power of dark retreat, I said, yeah, but Andrew, look, how many people are going to find how many even dark retreat cabins and
Oh,
caves exist on planet Earth right now? Not that many. The good ones are booked out years in advance. It's not necessarily easy and affordable. We've got to do something that brings the essence of this practice to people. And I said, it has to be workable. Now, you've described how you've built actually a little dark room in your house. Most people aren't going to do that, but we can all get a less than $20 eye mask. Yeah.
$13.
And start working with it. And so describe for me, because I threw this challenge out to you. I said, okay, Andrew, design a program that people can experiment at home with an eye mask that's going to deliver real microdosing results. And you said challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. Yeah.
How did you design it with this goal in mind? Yeah.
This is so great. Again, as usual, it's just such spot on questions. Because I mean, I was trained in the classic, I'm not dissing this at all. The classic 49-day tantric bardo yoga thing. I mean, that was my training. That's what I did. I mean, how many people are going to do that in this country? Maybe 100. It's so intense. It's so beyond graduate school. I'm not dissing it. It definitely has its place. But in this dark age, in the pejorative sense, so much distraction, so much light, runaway light pollution, bringing this medicine. This is why I think in the zeitgeist, right? You take a 50,000-foot view here, and I'll be talking about this in the course, some really marvelous principles from the Greek pre-Socratic tradition that talk about like why, I will share like, why is this stuff coming out into the world today? And in particular, how and why can we bring it to scale, so to speak? I mean, how can we use it in a microdose fashion? And this is precisely, in fact, what we'll be doing in the course, in conjunction with a study, by the way, in the course, if people elect to sign up for it, it's completely optional. But this is exactly what we're working with disenfranchised youth that are addicted to social media, all the pathologies that are taking place with that demographic, which is a wonderful surprise for me, 13 to 27 years old. We got 2 studies going on there. And the stuff that we're going to be working with, again, I am very candid and honest with the data that we have and the data that is still, not the data, but the models that are still somewhat speculative that we are going to be testing. I don't want to get out ahead of our skis, my skis here. But using some of the studies that Richie Davidson has done with the 5-minute thing, some classic studies from the Buddhist tradition about certain time durations where transformation takes place. Me working with a few other skilled guides, have been sort of developing this gray retreat thing. Exactly what I talked about before. Wearing the mask. I mean, you've got eyelids, just close them. That's the best way to microdose. I mean, if you have a little space in the closet, it doesn't have to be 100% dark. You can finally come out as a closet meditator. You go into your closet, you face a dark wall. There's something about having full body immersion for just a few minutes. And then I can pretty much promise you this, I think, from your own experience. You start to feel this for yourself. You don't need the data. Your experience is the data. I go in my study around here, like you mentioned, my dark room is right next door. I'm in there working, studying, doing all my research all day long. I start to get a little tense. What do? I step in for 5 minutes. It's like a, I wouldn't say a cold plunge because it's much more restorative. I step into the dark, I open to it. And if it's not that, it's just with my mask. I never leave home without this. I feel the stress leaving my body. I literally just feel it being absorbed by the medicine of the dark. And then what I've also noticed is so beautiful. You start to get so sensitive and open. You feel this. You feel the darkness itself start to permeate, start to soak in. So it absorbs your stress and your nervous dysregulations. And it also kind of invites this restorative. It kind of sponges it into you. And so this is exactly the kind of thing that we are actively studying this right now. And so some of the data I want to be a little bit cautious about proclaiming because we don't have it just yet. But you will see through your own experience, that's the most important data. Putting the mask on for 5 minutes, starting with, or even 10 minutes, you start to feel it because you're no longer dismembering, you're no longer distracting, you're no longer fracturing. You realize how much natural restorative processes take place when you just turn off the light and allow the body to kind of take center stage.
And in the course, as people are spending more and more time using an eye mask or going into a dark space if they have one, but let's just go ahead with the eye mask since that's probably what will be happening for most people.
Mhm.
What are you teaching people to do with the eye mask on? Am I lying down? Am I learning certain
Yeah,
practices?
yeah.
What am I doing?
Yeah, fantastic. So we're going to be doing in concert with the dark thing. So let me get to the dark mask specifically in just a second. But the following statement is super, super important. This course, just like Dark Retreat, it's not about the dark. It's not about the light. It's about life. This course is about life, how to live it in the most rewarding, loving, full way possible. And so that's really important. This course is about how to live. Dark Retreat is like life concentrate. It's a capacity to work with your life in a very compact, direct, concentrated way. Again, that's where the transformation comes from. So to make this more applicable to one's life, then we'll be working right out of the gate. There'll be a track of daily meditations that we'll be introducing, somewhat associated with a hand over heart, eyes closed thing. There's like 6, 7, 8 stages of that we'll be doing. We'll be working with some visual exercises, curtailing the extraordinary dominance of our sight neurologically. I mean, we're a sight-centric, weight-centric, light-centric culture, all in the service of egocentricity. And these are all these contractions and centricities that I'm talking about. So using some really simple on-the-spot exercises like holding your eyes still, this quality of just opening and relaxing our visual gaze, even with our eyes open, starts to apply and extend the meditation principles into daily life. Because most people, yes, you can microdose in the blink of an eye, but how about just looking up and holding your eyes steady onto something instead of grabbing onto your phone? Now, in terms of the masks, then yes. So we'll be working with this, and I'll be bringing about several different levels of instruction. But what's so interesting? It's quite a bit of an irony. The simple, most important transformative thing you can do in the dark is absolutely nothing. I mean, if you were to say something, yeah, open and relax. But in Buddhism, if you want some more structure, what is this called? Non-distracted, non-meditation. Hinduism is called the path of Anupaya, the path of no path. So this is a little bit hard to unpack in a short period of time, but it's a way to help people realize that they're not human doings. I mean, who we think we are is defined by what we do, but who we really are is revealed when we stop doing and we just be. So this may seem patronizingly simple and obvious, but the invitation, the practice is to just be, to just open and simply do nothing. And I will guide, it's hard to do nothing because again, we're not human beings, we're human doings. So the support will be, how do you just be? How do you relax? And you do that by feeling. You do that by getting in touch. You do that by staying grounded in your body. And then the body takes over. The body will just take over.
Okay, a couple more questions. Somebody's
Okay,
written
fire away.
in, I think it's a good one. What's the difference between this darkness thing and meditation? And then another person wrote
Sure.
in, I'm a meditator of about 8 years,
Yeah,
and I feel like I've hit a wall in my
yeah.
practice. How does time and darkness actually help break through a plateau like that? Does
Yeah,
it?
that's a good one. Yes, let's start with that second one first. Yeah, it can shake the snow globe, right? I like this analogy. Michael Pollan uses it with psychedelics, and I think it's applicable here. It can shake the snow globe, and how does it do it? By stopping all the shaking. And so what it does, there's several different analogies. So there's that one. Here's another analogy that I actually like. I like this one actually. If you look at Dark Retreat properly, you have to look at it properly in this regard, it really is a bit like a cold plunge. Um, a lot of data is out on how cold plunges are good for you. Hot plunges, they're also like saunas and steam. They're also good for you. Well, intentionally shocking the system can help realign the system. And so here's the qualifier, the disclaimer. The shock, the shock of Dark Retreat comes from the shock of doing nothing. That's the kicker. It's shocking when you're in there. So it's shocking to the system. And so for people, and we have seen this, right? For people who are long-term practitioners who do reach a plateau, they're kind of stuck. Dark Retreat absolutely positively, with the right guidance, with the right set and setting, can shake things up and reboot the system. Absolutely positively. The first question about meditation, well, this is core. So any practice that you do in your daily life you can absolutely positively do in the dark. So earlier I said, I think the single best thing you could do is like absolutely nothing, which by the way is the highest of all practices. The more advanced the practice gets, Tami, you know this, the simpler it gets, the less there is to say. And so it's actually ironically hard to do nothing like I mentioned all day long. So therefore, all your other practices, anybody who does any meditation in the dark, you can absolutely bring that skill set in the dark. In my experience is it acts like a meditation catalyst. It actually acts as a way to, yeah, just that, accelerate your capacities because you're working again in such a concentrated environment. With any practice you bring in there, the capacity to work within in this refined state is absolutely there.
Okay, I'm going to just ask a couple more questions and then we're
Okay,
going to
I love
have
it.
a conclusion all together. For a conclusion, I'm going to ask you to take us into a closing experience, Andrew,
Totally. Okay.
because one of the things for me is whenever we have these webinar events and we have hundreds of people gathered, I want to make sure we
Wow.
deliver the experience, in this case, of a deeply restorative nature. I want to make sure we deliver it here and now
Okay.
in this particular offering.
Okay.
But somebody wrote in, my life is genuinely overstimulated right now between work and caregiving. Realistically, how many minutes a day do I need in darkness to
Mhm.
feel a difference in my nervous system?
Yeah, it's a terrific question. And again, we don't have the data on this yet, right? This is how new this field is. I mean, what we're doing, Tami, in this course is I'm not exaggerating. This is not hyperbole. This is pioneering. So we don't really know. But again, we do know from Richie Davidson's work in non-dark practices that 5 minutes a day can transform you. Now, if in fact, and we think it's the case, that darkness you can accelerate meditation in general, I would not be surprised at all if even a couple minutes a day with a mask on will start to change you. But we just don't know. But here's the kicker. You participate in this course, we can explore these things together. We can start to collect the data pools and see. And so the other thing that makes this a little bit different, or I should say uh, interesting slash challenging, is psychological profiles and histories. And it's going to be really different from person to person. And it may be really different for you from day to day. So this is part of what we're going to be unfolding. But I can tell you, this is just me, specimen A, doing 10 minutes in the dark has been really magnificent. The TM people, right, starting decades and decades ago, 60 years ago, 20 minutes a day with TM was found to be transformative. I think dark retreat faster because it's more intense, it's more concentrated.
What about falling asleep? If I put a mask on and lie down and I'm exhausted, aren't I just going to fall asleep?
You could, and it's not necessarily problematic. You may need it, but this is again, as you know, the meditative maxim, not too tight, not too loose. Dark retreat invites too loose. And so this is why, in fact, we start by sitting up. We start with the practice sitting up so we can become familiar with the very definition of meditation in the Tibetan language, to become familiar with the dark and what it evokes and what it represents in this posture. Then when we get familiar with that, which doesn't take long, then you can transition to lying down. And this is why also practicing with a mask where you keep your eyes open underneath the mask, right? See, these super cheap masks are great. You can open your eyes underneath them. That also invites the mind to stay awake. But for sure, you're going to go into the dark for sure, especially when you're lying down and you're a little bit tired. Hell yeah, you're going to fall asleep. Is that a problem? Not necessarily. It's not necessarily meditative. It's not a problem.
Okay. I have a history of anxiety and can feel claustrophobic in
Oh,
enclosed or dark spaces. Is
yeah.
darkness practice still accessible to me?
Yes.
How would I ease into it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you just answered your own question. And there's some Czech and German researchers that are actually doing this sort of thing. I had a conversation with them a couple of years ago. This is where you can use it as a type of desensitization technique, where, in other words, you for someone like this, you literally just start with your eyes closed. You don't even put a mask on, and you realize, you know what? Yeah, I mean, you do a little mini dark retreat every night when you fall asleep. You really are. So you start with your eyes closed. It's more intentional. And then if you have claustrophobia, then you slowly, slowly, and very graciously, very kindly transition into the mask. And here's the thing, you put this thing on, you start to feel a little bit of claustrophobia. I will give exquisite instructions on how to relate to that feeling. Where are you feeling it? Making a relationship to that feeling. And then voila, you just tip the mask a sliver, a tiny bit of light comes underneath. You see the claustrophobia disappear. And so therefore you can engage in a progressive desensitization technique, which is not too uncommon for things like PTSD and the like. You slowly drip your way back in. So it definitely, this is not contraindicated. There are certain indications like derealization, depersonalization, psychosis, some disorders like that, borderline, that could be contraindicated for a practice like this, but not claustrophobia if it's engaged with in this capacity. Okay.
Our 6-week course with Andrew, Into the Luminous Dark, kicks off on September 8th. It's 6 weekly lessons. It's a progressive practice that you can deepen with over the course of 6 weeks. Andrew's there to offer 2 question and answer sessions. There are a lot of questions. We obviously didn't get to many of them today, but I tried to include as many as possible. And you're all welcome to join us. Again, it begins September 8th. We'll put a link in the chat, or if you're on the player page, hit the Learn More button. Andrew, take us into a feeling state.
Yeah, I love it. Okay.
Rest and restoration.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you mentioned earlier, and this last comment to situate, then we'll do it. I think one of the reasons this practice is so transformative is because it's the most experiential practice you can do. So with this one, I'm going to invite you, you know how wonderful this feels, to cup your eyes. Probably have to take your glasses off with your palm. And don't be afraid. We're gonna be talking a lot about this narrative of holding. Don't be afraid to hold your head, to cup your eyes very gently, and then open them to whatever extent you can underneath even your cupped eyes. And then simply just feel. Without judgment, with simple openness and curiosity. Just feel. And if it feels more appropriate for you to close your eyes, go ahead and do that. But I like this palms over the eyes because, again, it's this quality of making contact, in this case with yourself, holding yourself. And your eyes, our heads are so overworked, they're so overheated. Hold your eyes, hold your head in the cradle of loving kindness. And take that beautiful, delicious in-breath and then sigh on the out-breath. That's a taste of the medicine of the dark. There you go. And then slowly pull your hands away. Gently open your eyes. And then that quality, if it's invoked for me, of centeredness, tranquility with just one breath. Doesn't take long to contract. Doesn't take long to open because openness is the natural state. And step forward into the world with that quality of openness.
Which brings me to my final question,
Okay.
Andrew. I wore this shirt in,
in
celebration
Yeah.
celebration of Into the Luminous Dark.
I love it.
And for me, the dark becomes often, I mean, many things, but including a lit up night sky.
Yeah.
And so there's like dark, there's light, it's all, tell me anything on that, like how this shirt could be an interesting moment for Into the Luminous. I just want to talk about the shirt, please. Yeah.
No, we're on it, right? So my dear friend Chris Wallace, the non-dual Shiva Tantra dude, has a great line. There is no darkness within. There's only light unseen. So into the luminous dark. So this ties in, this is so cool. This ties into what we talked about briefly earlier. You know, we were to step outside. This, just bear with me for 1 second, because this is exactly what your shirt is about. Depending on where you are, you know, you step outside, you know, I'm still in Colorado. There's still, you know, blue sky. I step outside to look up during the day. I see nothing but blue sky, right? What I don't see, Tami, are the tens of thousands, actually the millions of stars that are up there. They're there, but you don't see them because they're obscured, they're obfuscated. By what? The sun. So what happens when you go into the dark, right? The sun sets, the conscious mind sets. The lights, there's a hell of a lot more stars out there than there is just our one light, our one conscious light. Those stars, Tami, represent the lights of the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is more accurately the obfuscated mind, the obscured mind, and it's obscured by light. At these deepest levels, light doesn't reveal, light conceals. And so last thing, I was in the dark when I had this insight. I am not exaggerating. I was lying on the floor, black beyond black, and just like your shirt, I'm not exaggerating. It was pitch black, and it was as if the curtains pulled back and I was looking into the Milky Way galaxy. I was looking at your shirt. And and it was like, OMG, these represent the lights of the unconscious mind. Then that's the creativity, that's the genius, that's everything coming out when that conscious mind just sets and the inner lights have the opportunity to shine. So beautiful for you wearing that. Yeah, cool.
Dark medicine for our dark time, what we need, with Andrew Holecek, Into the Luminous Dark. Andrew, it's always great to be with you. You know, we
It's
could
so
talk
fun,
for
Tami.
hours and hours, but we're going to close this down. Thank you so much. Come join us September 8th, friends. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.